day to everyone who's listening to this session of Tea Time Talks with MDRP. Today, we're going to be talking about one of my very favorite topics in the field of medical devices regulatory. That is to do with clinical evaluation and data sufficiency for novel versus established devices. In order to have this discussion, I have with me an expert speaker who's going to be taking us through the nuances of what clinical evaluation is all about. Today, I have with me Helen, who's going to be helping us understand clinical evaluation in a better way. Hi, Helen, and welcome to the episode. Let's hear a little bit about your background.
Yeah, hello, my name is Helene Kvie, and I'm CEO of QMed Consulting, a CRO and consultancy company based out of Copenhagen, Denmark. I have a long history working with medical devices back from the medical directive when that came into force, and now the last 14 years as an independent consultant and support to the medtech industry. Now with 14, 15 other colleagues of mine and other subcontractors that we're working with, basically supporting clinical questions, clinical strategies, clinical evaluation and clinical trials, but also regulatory affairs, quality assurance and market access. And as a background, I'm a cell biologist, but working with medical devices it's basically my hobby, and I enjoy it very much, and I have a great interest, especially in the clinical area. And with these new days, with MDR and all the guidelines coming into force, these are really challenging but interesting times for me. So thank you, and thank you for inviting me. I've been looking forward to this.
That's great, Helen. Thank you so much. And we're equally excited to have you here, given your background and your expertise and also your passion in this field. I'm sure that we are going to get to learn a lot in the next few minutes that we have this session. So welcome once again.
Thanks.
All right, folks. So before we dive into the actual questions about clinical evaluation, just a brief overview of what exactly clinical evaluation is. To sum it up, it is a set of ongoing activities that are performed by device manufacturers who want to bring their device into the market, global markets, or also sustain their devices marketing. This is mainly an analysis of clinical data that are held by the manufacturer and also available in the form of clinical literature. So it's going to include things like clinical trials, post-market surveillance, which is done in the form of complaints and sales, or your CAPAs, which are corrective actions, preventive actions, device recalls and such. And then you have clinical literature, where different users across the globe are using their devices in clinical practice, and they are publishing articles based on their experiences. These articles form a part of the clinical literature review that is done for the devices. And then we also have state-of-the-art discussion in clinical evaluation, the objective of which is to mainly establish that the device therapy that is being used in your subject device is state-of-the-art and it is contemporary. The final results of the analysis of clinical evaluation are presented in the form of a clinical evaluation report, which is one of the most crucial documents that you have for your device. The primary objective of clinical evaluation is to establish the benefit-risk profile of the device. Or to put it simply, we want to be able to say that the device provides benefit to the patient, and any risk that is associated with the device is not comparable to the benefit or is balanced out. We obviously do not want to have devices in the market that pose more risk than benefits provided by them. That's why an analysis of the benefit risk profile of the device becomes crucial, and it is a part of the device life cycle. All right. So I have a question for you here. Now, I'm thinking as a manufacturer, if I have a novel device, which is class 1 or class 2A under the European Union regulations, and I do not have enough clinical literature, nor do I have a predicate device, how can I go about performing a robust clinical evaluation and benefit risk profile analysis for my device?
It's a very good question, and actually, where one of the areas where there is a lot of uncertainties in the medtech industry for these low risk class products, how to actually provide robust clinical evaluation data and to be able to provide the benefit risk assessment. So there is the issue with this, that there is many times there are no literature basically available, and therefore that will trigger, even though it's a low risk class product, some kind of collection of clinical data. And many manufacturers of low risk class products are not really structured organizational wise and process wise to provide these real clinical data. The regulations open up for the more performance-based evaluation, which is the Article 61.10, but this is only for very specific products where you don't have any clinical claims. And for most manufacturers, you would actually like to have clinical claims, even though it's a class 1 or 2A product. So there is this requirement basically to try and then provide the data yourself, and then establish the necessary data needed for your CE mark. So you would have to have a clinical evaluation. It's required for all products, and you would also need to have a benefit risk analysis. But this is one of the very tricky points within the medical device regulation, and especially, as you mentioned here, there are no predicate, so there are no equivalent analysis. There are no equivalent products. As a point here, what I do hear from the industry is that there is to make a more easy collection of data. If this was a new concept that was going to be market launched, there is a lot of manufacturers that are then going to US to have their market approval there. First, collect data under more easy terms, or not so much restriction, and then use these data if they can come up with a rationale that the data can also be used for the European regulation and the CE mark. But tricky area.
Right, absolutely. I think even I'm thinking from the perspective that if I have, like in India especially, now we have a lot of young people who are getting into medical devices space, and they are coming up with these small scale products also that are going to be potentially very useful in the clinical field. But a lot of these are based on novel concepts, and I think with the regulatory scene currently in India, if they are able to perform some sort of feasibility and initial studies on this, then they will probably have to get a little creative about how they can use the data from these also to support any claims that they are making if they try to break through in the European market. I believe that is also what you are trying to say, right?
Yes, exactly. So you would try and collect the data in other regions where it can be easier. I think also, but again, here it states that there is no predicate, so no equivalent product. But you might be able to navigate there also, but it's really very product specific how this can be done.
Right, yes. So I think the manufacturers do need to go a little bit of an extra mile to get some sort of feasibility pilot study done, because especially for novel devices, you cannot go with no data at all in your hands and say that you want to perform a clinical evaluation. So there needs to be some sort of homework in the form of some feasibility pilot studies that they perform, and they're going to have to get creative with how they can use these data eventually then for the
Yeah.
European Union.
And I think if I can wrap up on this question, the positive thing is that you will get much better data to support your claims, because this is what you are testing then in this small clinical study. So from a market perspective, you will be much more robust in actually going out and talking about your product, what it can actually do, because you have data. The backside is, of course, that you would need to have money to conduct the small clinical study. So, but at the end of the day, it should actually help you. And I think also that's the whole purpose about having this restriction in the MDR, is that it makes good sense that you can actually tell how good or how bad your product is. What is it good for?
Absolutely. I'm in complete agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. So I think that clarifies this little bit of a question. Moving on. Okay, so we talked about this clinical evaluation approach right now when we were talking about the low risk devices. I'm trying to think how this approach will differ for a class 2B or 3 device. For implantables and class 3 especially, we know that clinical investigations are required. So can a clinical evaluation be successfully done with data from investigations only and minimal to no literature?
Yes, there are cases where there are no literature and or little literature. That will, everything is a balance within this, and how you're going to make your rationale behind the benefit risk assessment and what's good for your, if your product is good for the patients. And of course, the literature in the clinical evaluation, which leads back into the risk assessment and a lot of the other documents, and also the clinical investigation plans. If the literature is minimal, that means that you do not have very much data to work from. And your investigations will most likely, especially for class 3 and implantable products, they will kind of be more extended. You will have to do more work. In other cases, if you had a lot of literature and a lot of state-of-the-art material to build your investigation on, also for class 3 products, it will mean that you do not have so many uncertainties that you would investigate during your clinical studies. So I think it can be done, and there are situations where we see this, that this is a complete new territory. The data are really few, but then you just have a more solid investigation set up.
Right, absolutely. And I'm thinking that if we have data from clinical investigations, the pre-market investigation, then seeing that class 3 and 2B implantable devices are high risk, we can also have a PMCF plan in place that makes sure that there are post-market studies also happening and post-market investigations also happening to ensure that the entire shelf life of the device is covered, and that even after the marketing is done, we can continuously ensure that the shelf life of the device does not pose any safety and performance issues. And that could be a part of the overall plan that we present in the clinical evaluation. So our pre-market investigation will not be alone, basically, in the discussion.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also, in case that there are no literature from equivalent or predicate devices, I would say normally there will be some literature describing the disease that you are where you're trying to develop a product that can help for this disease. So you will then step back and then describe the actual disease more in detail, and then try to define your endpoint based on that for the investigation. So I think there are always some opportunities. And as you say, you will also move into the more post-market phase to make sure that you, in a broader term, collect data from the real-world setting.
Right, correct. I think that covers that. So just provides clarity to what manufacturers with high risk devices should be thinking about. If they feel that they do not have enough literature, they can still go ahead and present a robust clinical evaluation. Awesome. Okay, now this is something that even I struggle with from time to time. We have heard a lot about well established technology, legacy devices, and how the approach for clinical evaluation for these kind of devices differs from a general approach that we follow for devices that may have predicates or that may have not enough literature. So I want to
Mm,
understand what are the key highlights of the well-established technology approach that we have in MDR.
yes. The well-established technology is that new definition comes from the MDCD guidelines. It is not specified really truly through the MDR, but it reflects the way that we build up our clinical evaluation reports for these products. And it's intended for a specific type of products that's been on the market for many, many years. So medtech industry was born 50, 60, 70 years ago, and there are products that have not really developed. Of course, they have developed, but they are not I think the manufacturing process has improved and also the use of these products, and it has been refined, but there are no really change in the safety and performance of the product. But we're really looking at products that's been on the market for many, many years. Examples could be, for instance, now I work within the interventional industry. So products like introducer sheets, catheters, guide wires, they've been on the market for 30, 40, 50 years, and they are what I would call well-established technologies. And for these products, there have been actually from the MBCG group, they have come up with a guidance on that on these products, well-established technologies, also within the group of products called legacy devices that has been on the market that for a long time, that less clinical, high-level clinical evidence or data is needed to move into the MDR setting, and you can combine different inputs on of clinical data to be able to verify safety and performance. The tricky point here is with this principle is that you still have high risk class products which are well established technologies, and for these products you would need still to have high level clinical data collected, so from random not randomized but from clinical investigations, and this is it can be a challenge. I foresee challenges here because these high risk class 3 products that's been on the market for 30, 40 years, these are more or less commodity goods, and they are being used in millions at the market for the patients with high level of security and performance. But these manufacturers, they will still have to provide to keep their CE mark on the product, real life clinical investigation data. And as they are commodity goods, the profits on these products are really low. They are not of great interest for the physicians to test in a clinical setting. And they do have clinical claims, so we cannot use the Article 61.10 to actually prove safety and performance for this. So there are some challenges with it, but there are also some good things that for lower risk class products, so products that are not class 3 and implants, there you can put together another program. They have a long list of different inputs for clinical data, which are really helpful for a lot of manufacturers that have been providing these products for many, many years.
All right. Thank you for that, Helen. I have one point. So you mentioned that guide wires, catheters, introduced search fees, these are some of the devices that are generally qualifying to be well-established technology because manufacturers have had them in the market for years. In my
Mm.
experience, When I have worked with such devices, I've seen that because they've been in the market for so long and the clinicians are comfortable to use them, a lot of times clinicians also decide to use them in off label indications,
Mm-hmm.
where say, if a catheter is indicated for use in peripheral vasculature, you'll see that sometimes there are clinical literature studies wherein these catheters may have been used in coronary vasculature, whereas that's not indicated, or
Mm.
maybe sometimes even cerebral. So, talking from the perspective of data sufficiency, how do off label usage studies qualify to help with the overall clinical evaluation? I know that we'll be including them in the clinical evaluation report, but do you think that the outcomes from these studies are supporting the evaluation overall?
I think that they are the in the MDR, the manufacturers are required to take action upon off-label use. These data cannot be used for the clinical evaluation, but you can of course use these, or you should, if this makes good sense for the manufacturer and there is a market and there is a need. The manufacturer should consider to add these as a new product, new claim, whatever it is, and then provide the clinical data under a clinical investigation. So it's the off-label use. I've seen that actually over the last 4 to 6 months. I do hear that manufacturers are reacting much more promptly on off-label use. They are making other users, physicians, and also other manufacturers that are using devices, they are giving them information that they cannot use the device outside of the intended use, and that the product is basically considered as non-CE marked. So I think it's in the right way and it makes good sense because neither the physicians or the other manufacturers know how this product is being developed and what actually the risk is to use this product, maybe for another indication or another type of patient. So I think this is a good approach, but having said that, the manufacturer, if they see that and would like to include that as a claim or extend the intended use, they would have to go back and then roll out the whole process, making sure that they have the technical documentation to provide that or support that intended use and the patient population, and then get it CE marked.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's one way to make merry with the off-label usage because you
Yeah.
can use that to support any new claims. That's excellent.
Mm.
I'm also thinking that for manufacturers, just to confirm, are manufacturers required to report out off-label studies in the CER? I know that you said earlier that MDR has a provision to not add this, but just to confirm for our listeners, if they are developing a clinical evaluation report and they come across about 5, 6 articles in the literature that describe off-label usage, should they go ahead and talk about it in the clinical evaluation at all?
Yes, I would do that for sure. It then reflects on some other documents, but I think in the clinical evaluation it makes sense. There you're also describing your clinical development plan and also other activities that you are planning for this product can also be in a separate CER for the new indication that you are including that off-label use and say this was done, we didn't encourage it, but here are the data, and now here is the process on how we would like to follow that route. We see a need, and therefore we will develop the product for this indication. So I will include it in the CER for the new.
Excellent. Thank you so much for clarifying that, Helen. All right. Moving on. Yes. So clinical evaluation based on non-clinical tests and SOTA literature, which is state-of-the-art literature review. Now I'm thinking we already touched upon this a little bit where we said that if there is not enough clinical literature data, we can talk about the disease background and different studies that are done on this. So this becomes a part of the state-of-the-art discussion. So I'm thinking of scenarios where we have only non-clinical testing to establish feasibility and safety biocompatibility of the device, and then we have SOTA literature review. In what cases can this scenario be acceptable that only these two sources of data provide majority of clinical information in a CER?
Mm. I think that there are products out there where it doesn't make sense to have clinical claims, but they are still medical devices. They are within the definition of a medical device, but have no clinical claims. And examples that I heard about are the other day was the ECG machines. Just the machine itself, MRI machines. There are monitors. There are a lot of different products which are medical devices per definition, but do not have a specific clinical claim. And they will have a clinical evaluation which is based on non-clinical data and then state-of-the-art literature. And this is tried it. Now it's a new concept to have performance-based clinical evaluation. And we did try to put one together here just recently. And it's a different setup, and you have to be aware that the clinical evaluation is then dependent on the verification testings that you are performing, and not the clinical data that you would normally collect. So the flow is different. It's more for the planning purpose, basically. Now I'm talking about my own experience, that was a little eye-opener, that we are very, fixed on the milestone meetings and what needs to be prepared for the different milestone meetings of the clinical evaluation, but it changes with the performance-based clinical evaluation. But these are the type of products where you would have a performance-based clinical evaluation.
Oh, wow. So this performance-based clinical evaluation, I think that's very interesting. And like you said, it could be an eye-opener for a lot of us because we are so focused on a benefit risk profile and risk analysis, safety all the time that the efficacy overall does not get that kind of focus. And here I'm thinking that performance-based clinical evaluation is going to be a completely different setup. And the
Yeah.
example that you gave for the different kinds of monitoring devices, which are medical devices by definition, but are not really having any sort of safety aspect to them. I think that's going to be a very interesting approach to follow. All right. I guess we've covered quite a bit on clinical evaluation for novel and established devices, and I've got a good understanding of data sufficiency as well. And I think it seems like for medical device manufacturers, like we always say, clinical evaluation is a very customized approach. The teams need to sit together and decide which clinical evaluation strategy needs to be taken. And now with the MDR upcoming implementation of it, I think a decision on equivalent devices has also become very critical because the device manufacturers have to show that they are legally in possession of the technical documentation for any predicate device. And that's quite a limiting factor. So talking about data sufficiency for these devices, I think it's become the need of the hour because manufacturers often find that they are not able to take the equivalence route and they have to rely entirely on the data that they have at hand. And then the question arises, is what I have sufficient or not? Thank you so much, Helen, for providing your perspective on this. Any last thought, final thought before we conclude this session?
Yeah, I would just like to add, I've been conducting or writing clinical evaluations for many, many years, since it was just a couple of pages and 3 publications that you put into a document. I think the clinical evaluation is, as you also correctly mentioned early on, this is a very central document nowadays, and under the MDR, this is just enforced. And I think it will be, there are of course difference if you are from a small or large company, but anyhow you will have to find a team, develop a team where you will write the clinical evaluation together with these people. and get the alignment throughout the company. I think also that's one of the purposes in the MDR text, is that these documents do not stand alone, and that they need to be aligned throughout the companies, that they are aware about what it means, the text in these clinical evaluations. So have a team available. It's also for the benefit risk analysis. The trick about making measurable or defining measurable benefits, and the whole discussion there about the assessment, it leans out to, for instance, marketing. What material can they publish? It leans back to the development team. What is it we are claiming? How much freedom do we have here? So it's a central document, and I would recommend not writing this on your own. It's also a very large document, very complicated document. So you need some practice actually to put such a document together. So I think that's, but it's also very fruitful for the companies, I would say that. So remember to use it proactively, the text and the data, but that comes with the alignment. So I think that's the last word that I would like to say.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Helen. And you couldn't have said it better, because cross-functional team collaboration is crucial to bringing out a document that is as exhaustive as a clinical evaluation report.
Mm.
So here's to hoping that our manufacturers also bring all these suggestions, implement it, and make sure that their clinical evaluation strategies and the documents like CEP, CERs are always up to date, and we ensure that all these good medical devices continue to be serving our patients and their needs. So thank you once again, Helen, for being a part of this session. That's all that we have for today. This is Anusha Shrivastava signing off on this episode of Tea Time Talks with MDR.